I'm Stefan Blackiston-Moore. I'm Cats Protection's Advocacy and Campaigns Manager, and I'm joined by Jade.
Hi, I'm Jade Emery, and I'm Cats Protection's Campaigns and Advocacy Officer.
And what are we talking to you about today? Well, we've just had lunch, so I'm trying to remember, but we've got a very good title, Cat-alysts of Change. We were very pleased with that to start with. And that was a use of AI. I think that's as advanced as our use of AI has gone, with Jade coming up with. People don't talk about its use for that enough, I think. It's ridiculous presentation titles. Essentially, what we're going to be talking about today is email to target actions, emailing your MP, and so forth. Last year, we spoke about how we'd done quite a specific campaign, how we'd used reference data to localize a campaign, and I had a few discussions with people after that about the effectiveness generally of mass mobilization and how we can actually have an impact with email to target campaigns. Now, for reference, my background is I worked for an MP before I started with Cats Protection. So for the best part of a decade, I was on the other side, and I did implement, as part of that, a casework management system to deal with all your emails so that we could essentially process them, because there are so many that go into an MP's inbox now. So probably fair to say I've been slightly cynical about their impact in the past. However, over the last couple of years, we've done some campaigns, some email target campaigns, have been incredible, have really influenced things, and we've seen how it's worked. Now, as we'll go through, we'll talk through a specific campaign with this, but really timing is one of the key things that we'll get to in a summary on this. Now, for reference for last year, just so we're on the same page, yeah, that's come up. What happens when we send an email to an MP? So this, and I think I've spoken to some people who've worked for an MP, and we've agreed this is generally how things will go with an unfocused email to target campaign. Unfortunately, my laser pen, it doesn't seem to be working, but up here, essentially you're activating your supporters, you're getting them to get that email into the MP's inbox. You've spent a long time making sure you've got all that key policy details in there, lands in the inbox, quickly transferred to a casework management system. A common one is called caseworker.mp that a lot use, which you can see a screenshot of, probably a bit small there. That is assigned to a policy caseworker. All of those cases are tagged. Those individual messages aren't necessarily looked at. They're all generally saying the same. Even if you've allowed a bit of customization, they all say the same thing. They're getting that tag on. That policy caseworker is going to draft a response if you're lucky. They'll consider it and work out what the MP thinks of it. Or there are organisations called the PRS, the Parliamentary Research Service, used by the Labour Party, which drafts those standard policy responses. They're loaded onto caseworker, and whenever someone comes in, one of your emails, they get tagged with that, and that email goes back out to them. So essentially, you've created a loop there, and as you might notice there is no points the MP or a politician generally, or whoever you're targeting, is actually impacted. So in our view, sort of, unless you are thinking strategically about these asks when you're sending them, you are just creating a cycle. So that's what we're going to talk to you about today, and Jade is going to tell you a bit about the campaign we're going to talk about linked to this.
Yeah, so I'm just going to provide you with a bit of background to the campaign which we're going to be discussing. So back in June 2021, a bill called the Kept Animals Bill was announced by the government. This was very wide-ranging and had a few different aspects to it, which were designed to help kept animals in England and Wales. And this was really wide-ranging, from covering things such as restrictions on keeping primates as pets, to banning live exports, and more kind of interestingly to us, introducing restrictions on pet smuggling and pet theft. So the big issue today we're going to be talking about is our kitten smuggling campaign, because we were finding that the big we were presented with a really big issue back in 2021 when the Kept Animals Bill was recommending excluding cats from the pet smuggling aspects of the bill. The focus was massively on puppies, because this was a huge issue, and still is. Puppies were being smuggled in really poor conditions often, but our research was finding that this was also becoming a growing problem with cats being smuggled into the country, mainly due to the expanding market for pedigreed cats. So we were presented with this huge problem. So as anyone who works in animal welfare will know, or many others, the Kept Animals Bill was dropped in May 2023, which was a huge blow to many campaigns, but we thought we're going to use this as an opportunity as we thought it was likely that the pet smuggling legislation would come back in a different form. So we wanted to make sure that we took this opportunity and made sure that cats and kittens were included in any new legislation from the beginning. So happy to say that this does have quite a happy ending, and we were successful through using our engaging networks, mainly email to target actions. We were able to not only get cats on the agenda, but as you can see from my slide, we also had the Minister wearing a Cats Protection branded tie at the second reading of the latest pet smuggling legislation. So let's talk about how we used our asks strategically in our email to target actions to further our kitten smuggling campaign.
Thanks. Yes, ministerial ties is our key metric we like to measure by, so that was very good. Admittedly, it was old branding and it has influenced a discussion about whether we need to get some ties in new branding. When this came out, when the Kept Animals Bill was there, we had a consultation linked to it. It came out, and that's where it actually announced that they were looking to exclude cats from pet smuggling proposals. So obviously that was our first place we could go. There was this big announcement, we were taken aback by it, and it was something we could get out to our supporters. We could get out and say to them, please respond to this consultation. And we had 16,000, which was a great number for us, get involved, and this was a great first step in announcing that this was happening to them. Now, consultation responses, of course, with engaging networks, you can change the target. So this is to a specific target rather than with an MP target where it's based on postcode. So we put that in and managed to get them drafted letter for them that they could all send in. Now, this does make it a lot easier for supporters to engage. Consultation responses can be tricky to respond to. Obviously, organisationally, we're doing our own response where we're getting the really technical detail. But for us, being able to get across at that early stage with this issue coming live, that we're going to be shouting about this, essentially. It really got that message across. And it is time limited as we got up there. So that we really had that urgency behind it to say to our supporters, please write in now. Now, there are limitations, of course, with the consultation response, email to target action, and I should say this consultation has not actually been published yet. However, we do know that it will be in favour, well, the public were in favour of including cats because 16,000, I believe, is over half of the responses to the consultation. Now, they are going to, however, in that consultation response, just be counted as campaign responses. It will say 16,000 responses also came in from Cats Protection. However, for us, getting that recognition in there, and this was really about putting it on there that anyone involved in that consultation knew that cats were going to be an issue for them. And the other limitation we've had with this, there are sometimes complex data protection issues we faced with this, particularly in Scotland, where very specific questions have had to be asked, whether it can be published and so forth. And we've worked with the civil servants behind us, and they've said, no, you do need to answer that. So we've had to build custom parts of the form. And it is always worth, if you've got that relationship with the people working on the consultation, talking to them, because their mailboxes are sometimes not set up to receive 16,000 emails to a consultation. So if you have got that relationship, talk to them. And we did make sure that our responses were getting through on this. So once that was done, we had our next challenge of making sure this was highlighted in Parliament. So over to you, Jade.
So the next action we took was asking supporters to ask their MPs to write to the minister responsible. So there's two ways we could have gone about this. We could have designed our email to target and asked supporters to write directly to the minister. But what we did is we decided to ask our supporters to write to their MP, asking their MP to write to the minister. We thought this way we're going to double our impact because we're going to be making MPs as well as the minister aware of the issue and the campaign. So this is a really great starting point for any campaign, and it's also one that's really good to revert to between time-sensitive asks, which is what we did. So we launched this one in spring 2022, and we had as a result, we had 40 actions taken by MPs, which included MPs writing to the minister as we directly requested, but also some of them asking questions in Parliament on why cats were being excluded from this legislation. It's also quite a low bar ask for politicians. It's a nice, easy one for MPs to get back to their constituents on and say, yes, I've done this, I've written to the minister. You also have an added benefit of MPs. They might like to sign a letter when they're writing to the minister, so you're increasing the likelihood that they're actually going to see the letter that's going out in their name. You may also have MPs take the issue a bit further. However, of course, it does have limitations. You're unlikely to drive the issue forward just by doing this kind of action. and you are also unlikely to learn anything new from the minister that your organisation doesn't already know, as they're likely to be quite cautious in their response to MPs. You also might have quite a different kind of response from opposition or government MPs. Some opposition MPs may be kind of hesitant to write to the minister and then have to repeat the government's line on something back to their constituents if their party has quite a different view of this. But overall, it was quite successful and well worth doing.
Right, yeah, I realise now we're jumping quite far forward to February 2024 here, but we did run various variants of that throughout that period, depending on what was happening, the progress of the bill and so forth. Now, we're jumping forward now to February 2024. This is when we had the second reading of the Private Members Bill, which included cats, hurrah. And so we decided with this, we wanted to make sure that the profile of cats kept being raised with this, that it was something that MPs were talking about in the debate. And we did something that we haven't done too much before. We tried this once before. There's a fairly common action. You see that please attend the debate as the ask, which is very generic. But we turned it around and we spoke to them more about the briefing. Now, of course, we're sending briefings to MPs ahead of this debate anyway. So we turned it around. So the email that was sent to them was about a week after we'd sent our briefing. That was basically a chaser. Please read your briefing from our supporters. And it was a quick action, just I think we only ran it for a week. So we had 5,000 send these emails to their MP. Prompting them to read the briefing that was linked through via a PDF, which I think we'd hosted on Engaging Networks as well. Now, as I mentioned, we had run this once before on another issue on pet theft. We'd run this, and it hadn't been quite as effective as we thought. And I think our timing was slightly off. So when we got to this one, we thought about it, and we went a week after we'd sent our briefing. So there was that chaser coming through. That meant that anyone who was going to that debate or anyone with interested in it, we were cutting through that loop I showed at the start where it's just going around in a circle. We're always thinking about how can we make sure there's a break there where somebody is informed or our target is actually has this mentioned to. So of course, if they're going to this debate, it's more likely to be mentioned to them. Oh, you've got a lot of constituents writing to you about this, and they've sent you this briefing, which perhaps your briefing might be lost otherwise. And it did lead to a number of mentions in this debate, and we do have Sarah Jones there, who specifically during this debate mentioned Jan in her constituency, who writes often about cats protection. And we've got the key stat there that she'd mentioned that was in the cover letter. Now, so this is one limitation of that actually what's going to be looked at is that email. So make sure you've got your key points in that email. And that figure there, that's why we wanted to keep hammering home that there's 50,000 cats that are being brought over. And we managed to get that repeated time and time again because those emails to MPs were landing and they were getting attention. They were breaking that loop because a lot of the MPs were going along to this debate. So they were given this email when they were leaving the office perhaps one day. So it was there in their hand. We'd got it in front of them. So this is inconsistent and issue dependent, as we didn't have the same effect, but really I think timing's the key thing on this. But it did mean that politicians were informed. We did, as I mentioned, continue to run actions throughout this period, though, and we did have some more general ones, which Jade's going to touch upon.
So yeah, during this period, we would occasionally, if we didn't have any kind of time-sensitive asks, we would go back to just a general support ask. This is really good, yeah, when you don't have anything like really specific or time-sensitive coming up. So we usually took the form of asking our supporters to write to their MP, just asking for them to show general support for their campaign, and we would just leave this running. The main reason is we like to avoid closing any campaign pages completely, firstly when the campaign is still ongoing, and secondly just to avoid issues when we have links to a campaign page, like on our website or through the shares that have been shared through Engaging Networks Action. We like to have something for supporters to do when they do eventually click those links. So we would leave this kind of running in the background. So this was quite good for just kind of keeping the issue in the consciousness of your supporters and politicians, as they'd get kind of like a trickle of emails in asking for support. And we did have some PQs tabled as a result of one of these emails, which was quite unexpected but a really pleasant surprise. And it's also great for identifying any new supportive MPs or stakeholders who may just see the email and then kind of be completely outraged by the issue and get in touch. However, of course, this does have huge limitations because it doesn't really have a very specific ask. There's nothing time sensitive or with like there's nothing time sensitive for them to do or no specific ask with any kind of political urgency. But we would say it was well worth doing just to kind of have running there in the background, and it did result in some really nice, pleasant surprises and was kind of minimal effort.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess it's essentially with that loop I spoke about, there is also an element of chance there that the right person happens to see your email. So they were hitting occasionally and having that impact, but they weren't really pushing it forward on their own. So I guess in summary, really, it's very much where we align those things with wider public affairs work we were doing, something that was happening. And for me, it's really, we talk a lot about mobilization, how to mobilize our supporters. But the reality is we need to think about it with politicians in the same way and who's receiving those emails if we want them to have that impact. Now, impact is very hard to measure. It's much nicer for us to point to a nice metric of how many people have taken an action because it's long term and it's hard. But the reality is we need to think about how we're getting that cut through when it lands in an MP's inbox. How do we make sure somebody is looking at it? So where we've got those general support emails, they weren't always doing that, but we could occasionally have a nice hit from it. There are a few other points we wanted to consider when we were doing this, a few other things that had come up. First of all, changing us, as Jade mentioned there in that last slide. We always like to have an action live. We make a lot of use of the share function on engaging networks, particularly WhatsApp, which has been really effective for us. But then, of course, you've got old links hanging when we're following that route of making sure things are timely, making sure there's urgency behind it, because those actions have to end. There is a time limit to them. So we use in the admin page, we use that closed landing page to rather redirect people to another generally linked action, like Jade said there. If there's a more general one, if there's a petition, if somebody's clicking on something about kitten smuggling, they're getting something about kitten smuggling. Worst case scenario, we do have a closed page where we have our other links and explain to them on that. But it's always worth having that to keep things ticking over, as Jade mentioned. Next up, timing. That was the big theme for us, really. Making sure that you're considering when you're sending these, is it actually going to have an impact? I know for us, it's sometimes that's when we've got an email date. But really, we've got to think about this strategically. What are we trying to achieve with this? Where are we trying to push this forward? So those timings where we had things like the briefing, they were much more effective. They had an impact. And we could see that very clearly through how they were spoken about in Parliament. And also, other events. For us, we are willing to pause, and sometimes if there is something big that happens in the news, we do need to consider about what happens if an MP's inbox is suddenly there's a load of emails about cats and there's some worldwide event that's happened. It can seem a bit off, so we do have to step back slightly, because I do remember situations when I was working for an MP, we'd suddenly get thousands of emails and something big had happened in the world where you'd expect people to be emailing you about that, and it seemed slightly off. So what was the perception of your organisation in the office, the MP's office at that point when you've hit? Because of course, yes, it's a very salient issue for your organisation, but something big's happened that everyone else is talking about. So we are quite cautious about our timings, always make sure we know what else is happening and what other campaigns are likely to be running at the same time. Next, using email to target for event support. Now, we didn't actually do this in kitten smuggling, so it didn't really fit in here, but that is, from my perception, where some of the most effective email to targets were. Like I'd said about with that briefing support, sending out briefing and then following up with an email from our supporters saying, read the briefing. Sending out an event invite, if you've got a parliamentary event, obviously, as we heard about from one, I think the last session, it's a huge amount of work to organise those events. However, if you are doing that, making sure that your supporters are chasing on that invite, because that's a nice, easy win. For the person who's got to draft that response, it's much easier if the MP or whoever you're targeting goes along to that event, gets a photo. That can go back to supporters, that's nice. You've got that chance to engage with them. And it is, as I say, really effective way to get that cut through in the inbox, because you've got a lot of people saying, please go along to this. And it's easy for everyone if they go, and their constituents are very happy when they do. And last of all, we've got a point next. We've been asked about this a few times. How do we see the responses that MPs send to their constituents / our supporter? We always, in the auto response, we've always got a message there saying, please, if you do get a response from your elected representative, please do consider passing it on to us. That on its own has proved very effective. We generally, I think, see most of the responses that go out. And we can tell when those standard emails have ticked in, when we're getting the less unique ones, because they start coming through en masse. And It's also in the email journey. If you've got follow-up email journeys, prompt them again, remind them that it's happening. So that's the main way we're sort of getting those responses, and it has been really useful for picking off people who that's a new person that we could engage with. Now, that's almost everything from us. However, I did want to flag this email that Austin sent while we were planning this presentation about last year's ones, which we got to mention in the PS, which is really nice. Thanks, Austin. But obviously, my eyes were drawn to that bit I've underlined there. It was just for the amount of cat photos. And we were quite conscious we haven't included many cat photos. So I have got a bit of a solution on the next slide, but I verified with Corin that if you've got a cat and you upload a picture of your cat to the wall, I think it counts as a competition entry, doesn't it? So please, and there's one person who already has without prompting, so please put pictures of your cat on the wall. I think I asked that last year, but I didn't see many. But because there's a competition now, we do want to see your cats. But also to cover off the lack of cats on our slides, we have the advocacy team's cats here. Jade, I believe that is your cat first. It's not. Oh, it's not. We'll show you our cats. That's meant to be an animated GIF with all of the team's cats. Or Jade, did you replace it with just your cat?
No.
You promise?
But I mean, she's pretty cute.
Impa. And Impa's from the RSPCA, not Cats Protection.
Before I started.
Sorry, no, it's fine, it's fine. My cat there, Neve, would have been, she was from Cats Protection. But anyway, did anyone have any questions or want to share about how you've done your asks? We'd love to hear.
Round of applause.
Look at that, there's my cat.
Jade.
Oh, brilliant.
And we do have a number of questions for you.
A number.
Some of them you may have covered, but maybe you can expand on them.
Are they cat photos?
First one is, was the MP writing to the minister set up via a write to page you created? And if not, how do you know how many MPs wrote to the minister?
That's due to people writing back to us, essentially. That's I'd say a minimum. I think that was the responses we know we received where supporters wrote back to us with the ministerial response that had been forwarded on to them. There probably were more. And so that, as Jade mentioned there, that's really useful because a lot of MPs' offices, if there's a letter going to the minister, they'll probably want to sign it. So you have got, again, you've broken that loop because that's in front of an elected representative. So we found sort of a more useful way to think about it than just writing to the minister. So you're getting two birds with one stone there, really.
The next one up is, what did you ask supporters to do after emailing the target? So was there a follow-up?
Oh, okay. So generally we'd push to share ask, and it's usually WhatsApp. WhatsApp has been much more effective for us. Less people do it, but when they do, generally we do see a response. So we've given them that. We have been working with fundraising teams on including donation asks as well. But for most of this, going back, that's more recent. This was often share ask was what was daisy chained on afterwards.
Okay, and do you have a way of knowing if an MP has seen the supporters' emails?
No, not really. I mean, it's again, that's why it's not fun well, there was a lot of talk about data in the last one. Unfortunately, we can't get nice data on that because you don't know who's looked at it, but we do have stuff that's indicative because, like in that quote we had, it was read out, and it was read out multiple times during that debate, which is a sign that it works, that action was effective.
Okay, this is one about evergreen actions. If you have an email MP action always live, how do you create the urgency and momentum for your higher bar email MP asks to avoid repetition?
Yes, I guess. Well, they're not pushed, so they will just sit there as actions in the background. We won't proactively push them. I mean, part of the problem is when we're working with the teams on the fundraising side, they of course like some consistency. So when we're saying, oh, you can put this in for a week, it's slightly annoying for them. So we do have things in the background that go into wider email journeys where they're being sent out. But yeah, it's we generally, when we're sending emails to our supporters, we're putting in the urgency there in the messaging to them. And then, of course, you've got to think again, like I said, you've got to think about how you're getting through to that inbox. So subject line, of course, is always the useful way to consider about how you get things open. So we think about that a lot with landing in the inbox, which is why we're going with sort of please read this briefing type thing that somebody might look at.
Okay, a couple of questions which you can kind of group together about reporting impact back to your campaigners. How do you report impact back to your campaigners over a long campaign when change is a more long-term aspiration?
Yes, Did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I'd say mainly just kind of letting them know about any progress or any kind of even small victories you have. Even just letting them know kind of numbers of supporters that have taken an action is quite positive, and we get quite good responses to those. So that's quite good when you're just, pushing the same action a few weeks later. You can go back to them and say, this many people have taken the action. Maybe if you've had some progress or if you've heard back from some MPs or something or had some PQs, it's good to include that. So just, celebrate any kind of victories.
Yes, and actually in the small breakout rooms earlier, this was mentioned, and we found our supporters do like much smaller updates than we thought. We thought, can't really contact them until we've got a win, and this has taken years. So those smaller updates, and when things are being raised, if there's a question even, you can flag that to say, look, it's having an impact, and show them as it's cutting through. I think your numbers naturally do drop off, and I think it's not the end of the world that we started off with 16,000 responses and then it's dropping off, because the reality is the number that you're getting through to the MP's inbox doesn't matter too much. I've seen some where a big mailing list just today. The first one lands, you go, right, okay, the inbox is just going to be flooded for now. And then they will, again, once those subject lines are picked up, it's essentially automated that they're drifted off to that caseworker management system.
An interesting one here about gatekeepers. How do you navigate with relationship gatekeepers, i.e. MP caseworkers and researchers? So you've got another piece of the chain there.
Yes, well, I guess that's really where we were with that circle. We always think about if worst case scenario, it just goes round and the supporter's got a response. It's those people who are going to be looking at it. So those things we mentioned there, that making it relevant, making it timely, so that there is a reason for it to be flagged. Because often, depending on where the office is based, if it's based in Westminster, they might have direct access. If there's a casework team in the constituency office, it's probably on a Friday when the MPs come back, there's limited time to actually raise these things. So for us, it was always, that's why I say the event one is so useful. And you ran one recently for an event in Wales, where we could see the impact of that you could see it was then shown to the MSs, because the numbers jumped up that were RSVPing to we got about half in the end, from next to nothing. And getting that cut through, that email's landing and they go, oh, I should show this because there's an event, something like that, something that's being asked of them that has that time limit, rather than just, what is your view on this? That can be handled by anyone, including, as I mentioned, PRS and PRU, they can respond. But in terms of whether they're going to an event, that's something that only someone in the office can answer.
Another interesting question, got some great questions coming in. Did you find any interesting trends in political affiliation of MPs written to, i.e. was it strong in Conservative or Labour constituencies?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Did you find any interesting trends in political affiliation of MPs that you wrote to? Was it strong in Conservative or Labour constituencies? Was there any kind of division in terms of parties?
I mean, we haven't actually done the full analysis of where our supporter base is. I think they probably will go towards one side. But what's interesting with responses, and this is what we spoke about last year, is sometimes you get lucky in that those first few that go in, that's when they're sometimes spotted. And last year it was because we made it really localised. And if you can do that, it is even more useful if you can bring that down to that level. Because then you're getting past that political side, that it's about something local and MPs are local representatives. We did speak a bit about the difference in position when they're responding, if they're asked to write to a minister now. Of course, it's useful for a Conservative to be able to send back the ministerial response, so they will do that straight away. Sometimes with an opposition MP, you'll think, well, hang on, we're putting this view across to the minister anyway, I'll write, but actually I'll send my own response. So there will be different approaches to MPs. I'm not sure if that's quite covered what the question was, but if anyone wants to elaborate on that question, I'm happy to talk more about it.
More dicing and slicing of the data to be done by the sound of it. Got two more questions we might be able to fit in. One of your greatest fans by the look of it. Last year you did a great presentation including how you linked into Facebook and local Facebook groups. The questioner asks, are you still doing anything with these audiences? With the audiences from your last campaign last year?
Yes, we're not quite there with data integration, so things are slow for us at the moment. However, yes, they sort of are moving over to our general mailing list. We've paused that action from last year just from a time sink, because it did take a long time to get the reference data all built in, and obviously we are running up to a general election at some point, so our focuses are changing. But it is something we'll redo, and we are thinking about ways to reuse the reference data we spoke about last year, try and localize those messages. And there was great talk from the Alzheimer's Society about how you do that, how they were doing that when people came along earlier. And that for us, getting it in the subject line, get those local stories in there in the subject line, because you can on engaging networks amend it so that you can put in reference data within that as well, we discovered, which was really useful for getting cut through.
And the final question for you, which kind of ties in nicely with that, is have you found a way to combat people's reluctance to contact their MP because they perceive their MP as disinterested in the topic?
Yes, I mean, it is a good question. We get people come back to us with that. We will email back and reply, and I mean, obviously that's a horribly difficult process that does take a long time, because you're manually replying to them, explaining, actually, no, you will get these responses. I think for us, communicating those small victories helps, though, saying, look, this has happened as a result of X, Y, and Z, so having that direct chain link through from their email or others' emails because they haven't done it because they don't think it will work, and showing actually it does have an impact. There are MPs out there who will not respond to campaign emails altogether. There's not a huge amount you can do about that, to be quite honest, and there's arguably from their perception, a legitimate reason they're getting sent mass emails. They will put up responses on the website, they'll say. So to be honest, there isn't a huge amount you can do about those ones, but we would always encourage them to say, look, it just continues to highlight that this is an issue.
Brilliant. Well, I think a round of applause is welcome for everyone here. Thank you for sharing new knowledge.
Thank you.